Have you ever walked out of a doctor's office feeling crazy, unseen, or dismissed? Just like a toxic relationship, that kind of medical gaslighting can leave deep emotional scars. Today, we're talking with fibromyalgia coach Tami Stackelhouse about how to reclaim your power and start trusting your body again. So, if you've ever questioned your own reality because somebody in authority told you it wasn't that bad, this episode is for you.
Have you ever felt something was wrong but couldn't explain it? Like the person you love was slowly chipping away at your sense of self?
Believe me, we have been there. Different marriages, but to the same man, with the same toxic pattern. But God was still working.
We're Lizzie and Deana, women of faith, survivors, and truth tellers.
Surviving toxic relationships is for any woman stuck in confusion, healing after betrayal, or just searching for her voice again.
You are not crazy.
You are deeply loved. Hi there, we are so happy to have you today. Lizzie and I are proud to present Tami Stackelhouse. Tami is an award-winning author, a founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute, host of the Fibromyalgia Podcast, and executive producer of the featured documentary Invisible. Tami teaches fibromyalgia patients how to take back control of their lives and health using her signature fibromyalgia wellness framework, so they can break free from the prison their bodies have become and begin living the lives that they love. So Tami, welcome. I cannot wait to hear what you have to share with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. You know, fibromyalgia is one of those things that is so common, but just doesn't get enough press. Like nobody wants to talk about it. Just to throw out a couple of statistics there, fibromyalgia affects about 6.4% of the population. It is a little bit more women than men, so it's about 7.7% of women, which works out to 1 in 13 women. I have also recently run across a quote by one of our researchers that said that he believes only 1 in 4 people with fibromyalgia are actually diagnosed. So we could take that number and multiply it by 4. There is a lot of us out there. Yeah.
And you know what, Tami, I want to just jump in and say that back when I was working in a big medical practice back in my youth, I worked for several doctors, 9 of them to be exact. And you know that they literally thought that fibromyalgia was just fake and patients were just making it up. And I mean,
yes, right. The thing that's amazing about all of this is that you can actually find descriptions, full descriptions of fibromyalgia, slightly different name, but you can see the full description of the condition as far back as early 1800s. So for 200 years, we've known about this. But it really was seen as sort of a hysterical woman's illness. It was considered to be more of a mental illness than a physical illness. And so I think, you know, it's amazing that that has gone on as long as it has. Like, I think we should have found an answer sooner. But I think, I mean, not to get into that whole thing, but I think the fact that it does primarily affect women is a huge part of that. We didn't have diagnostic criteria actually established for fibromyalgia until 1990. So it's kind of blows you away. And then the first medication specifically for fibromyalgia wasn't approved until early 2000, like somewhere around 2005, 6, somewhere in there. So yeah. 200 years of you're crazy, and that is still something that, I mean, it's definitely better, but you do still find that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's just kind of fascinating because I think of that as like being married to a toxic spouse, and you think you're the crazy one, and you're going to get all this support or help, or like you almost pray for somebody to find something wrong so you can handle it.
Yes. And, you know, so many of my clients have this form of medical PTSD. They have just been to so many providers. And, you know, just to stop and be clear, I've got lots of friends who are doctors. This is not a blanket statement, you know, all doctors are bad. No, there's good ones out there. But because fibromyalgia is one of those things we don't have a test for that we can see definitively, this is what you have. X-rays look normal, labs look normal, MRIs look normal, we look normal. right? And so it can be really, really hard to get a diagnosis. And exactly what you said, you end up with people having this sort of PTSD from their medical experiences. They've been treated poorly. They do start to question their own, maybe I am making this up, And for those of you who are listening, like if I could just get if you take one thing away from this, fibromyalgia is real. It is a real physical illness. There are lots of research that shows what's really going on in your bodies. It is absolutely not psychosomatic. Yeah.
I have to relate it to toxic relationships. I'm like, well, this is kind of an internal thing. And then when other people say it isn't you, what you are seeing, what you are feeling is real. But the problem is you can't get a divorce from a fibromyalgia.
Right, from your own body. That doesn't, but you can get a divorce from your doctor.
Good point. Good point. Yes. And I'm sure lots of people probably might be amening that one. Amening. Yeah, that might not be a word, but I'll make it today.
Yes, I'm with you there. Yeah, I think that, our culture sort of puts doctors on these pedestals and we see them as the expert. I mean, and they are. Right? They went to school for a real long time. They know a whole lot of stuff, but they don't live in your body, right? And they do not teach about fibromyalgia really in medical school. In the US, we have an average of 9 class hours on pain management. That's all pain management. That's not even just fibromyalgia. That is all pain, acute, chronic, everything. 9 hours. So of course, they're not really equipped to know what to do with us. And that's not entirely their fault. Like, that's just the way it is. Our primary care especially has to know a little bit about a lot of stuff, right? And then I think as patients, we have to make sure that we are super educated so that we can make sure we're getting the care that we need and move on if we need to and find those right providers. I'm a firm believer that you don't necessarily need a doctor that knows a lot about fibromyalgia. You just need one that is willing to learn with you. And that can be the harder thing to find in many ways, right? But there is a lot of information out there on fibromyalgia. People like me can help with that, fill that knowledge gap. But really, you want a doctor that treats you like a human being, right? That believes you when you say there's something wrong, that doesn't think you're exaggerating or making things up, like just basic human decency, right?
Yeah. And so with that, like, tell us your story. I know you were diagnosed with fibromyalgia and now you're in remission, which is amazing. So tell us how you got from where you were to where you are today.
Yeah. So I was one of those kids that was kind of always sick. Like, there was always kind of something wrong. My parents were always taking me to the doctor for this or that or whatever. And if I had been a kid today, I'm sure I would have been diagnosed with depression and IBS. And I may have even been diagnosed with fibromyalgia much earlier, but I wasn't. My first chronic pain diagnosis was when I was in high school. I was diagnosed with chronic daily headaches and migraine. And so that was really like my first experience with what we were just talking about. When I went to the neurologist for my headaches, he said, "There's nothing really wrong with you. You just have headaches." And as a teenager hearing that, I thought, what do you mean there's nothing wrong with me? Isn't this like not right? But now, being a little bit older and wiser, I know what he was really saying was, you don't have a tumor or anything like that. But what I heard was, there's nothing really wrong with you. You just have headaches. Like, get over it, kind of. So that was the first thing. And then as I started to get older, like into my early 30s, I would come home from work and just feel really exhausted and like I had been working all day. Like I had a manual labor job, only I had an office job, right? So I had that kind of overall achy soreness. And I did my own research, like we have to do, and even asked my doctor at one point, is it possible that I have something like fibromyalgia? And, I'm messaging through and the nurse that got back to me said, well, I'm not really sure what that is, but why don't you make an appointment? Obviously, I didn't make an appointment because why would I if you don't even know what I'm talking about? Right? So then a few years later, I got married. Different insurance. I had been on an HMO, and if you know anything about HMOs, they're really great if you fit in their little box, and if you're outside their box, not so much. So I got different insurance, got a different doctor, and I I totally feel it was one of those God things where I just randomly picked somebody from a website, and it turns out she had actually studied fibromyalgia as her special project in medical school, right? Right? Isn't that awesome?
Wow. I am so grateful for those God moments. I swear they are,
Yep.
they are
Yeah.
amazing. Yes.
Exactly. So I finally got my diagnosis. I had been married, I don't know, about 6 months at the time. And I remember leaving her office with like about 3 or 4 prescriptions I had to go fill and a list of supplements to buy. And I cried all the way home because it had been years that I'd been trying to get a diagnosis, get an answer, and finally here was somebody that was going to be able to help me. And it's exactly what I think, Lizzie, I think it was you that was talking about that it's like, oh yeah, there really is something wrong. Finally.
Yeah.
Right.
It's that
So
validation.
Yeah, that validation. And also just I have help finally, maybe something can improve. So I started, doing all the things she told me to do, but I still felt like I wasn't getting worse, but I also wasn't getting better. And it really just felt like I was essentially treading water. Like I wasn't drowning anymore, but I was still, in the muck. And a couple years into that, I, talked to my doctor about it and was like, hey, isn't there something we can do? Like, this isn't the future that I want for myself. And that's when she introduced me to a health coach. And I had never really worked with a health coach before. I had actually had some coaching type experiences, like mentorship type experiences. So I kind of understood the concept. But having somebody that I could really strategize with, like, okay, she wants me to go gluten-free. Now, how the heck am I going to actually do that, right? Like, what do I do at the grocery store? How do I change what I'm eating? Like, okay, in concept, it sounds easy, but in practice, it's a whole different deal. So having somebody to strategize with, hold me accountable, just all those things. And 6 months after starting to work with her, I was in a very, very different place. And that's when I decided to become a coach because I felt like I had been given this beautifully wrapped present that was my life. I finally got that back and I didn't want to keep that all to myself. And so I wanted to share that. And that's when I became a coach and started the whole next bit. So yeah, that's how it all started.
So are you a health coach or is there a specific type of coach for fibromyalgia?
So yes and yes. So when I first started, I became a certified health and wellness coach, but pretty much from day one, I specialized in working with people with fibromyalgia because that was what I knew, right? That was the problem I had just not completely solved, but I was in a much better place and I knew more than most people. So I started doing that. And then after doing fibromyalgia coaching, so I was, like I said, my certification was as a health and wellness coach, but I called myself a fibromyalgia coach. After doing that for about 6 years, I wrote my first book and created a training and certification program. So now there is a certified fibromyalgia coach. That's something I made.
Wow.
Yes,
Congrats.
yes.
That's amazing.
It is. And we hold it's a registered trademark with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the whole thing. It's pretty cool. But that training, so I have 2 trainings. You can kind of think of it like getting your bachelor's and then going and getting your doctorate, right? The advisor certification is that first part that is just the fibromyalgia training. So teaching you, here's what's happening with fibro pain, fibro sleep, like here's supplements, here's medication, here's lifestyle stuff, like all of that. Those students graduate with, 30 some hours of training just on fibromyalgia. So think back to when I said 9 hours of pain management training. And then our coaches actually graduate with something like 370 hours of training. So it is a health and wellness coach, but we are very focused and specialized into fibromyalgia itself. And I think of fibromyalgia coaching as being this intersection of health coaching, life coaching. I helped one of my clients buy tires for her car because she was just so overwhelmed with the whole process, right? And that overwhelm and stress was making her fibro symptoms worse, right? So health coaching, life coaching, peer support. We all have fibromyalgia ourselves. Sometimes even a little bit of lay counseling, right? Like we're not therapists, we're not doctors, but we've been there, done that, and we can sort of hold your hand and walk you through that.
That's amazing. I told you I had a couple of friends that have fibromyalgia, at least a couple. If someone is listening to this now and they have fibromyalgia or they have, a friend or loved one that has it, what are some immediate things that maybe you could just suggest for them to start getting better?
Yeah. So there are two things I want all of my clients to do. The first one is to really get a good deep dive on your thyroid function. So not just a TSH, but full thyroid numbers, antibodies, the whole thing. I would say with my students who come through my training program, about 3/4 of them maybe have thyroid disease that's undiagnosed. And probably about 1/3 of them actually have autoimmune thyroid. So they have Hashimoto's. Never knew it. So that's the first thing that I would, recommend that you do. The second thing that I think all fibromyalgia patients need to do is have a sleep study. Sleep apnea is not all that common in the normal population. It's like less than 10%. But with fibromyalgia, it's 45% of us. So you could take a quarter, flip it, heads, tails, that's kind of your chances. And it's high enough that I think everyone with fibromyalgia should have a sleep study, even if you think you're sleeping fine, because you just don't know, and those percentages are so high. Now, both of those things, of course, take your doctor and can take time to, convince them you need these things and then get your results. So in the meantime, what I would recommend doing is start to think about, the technical word is pacing, but I think we hear that and it kind of sounds like the word diet, right? It's like, that's not what I want to do. But think about how you use your energy and making choices about where you're spending that energy. One of the things that was super valuable for me was actually starting to use a step tracker and using that kind of backwards. So instead of having a number that I was trying to reach and go over, like this is my minimum, that number was my maximum, right? Like that sort of was representative of how much energy I have for the day. And so if I only have, these are real numbers, by the way, if I only have 3,000 steps that I can walk for the whole day without putting myself into a flare-up of pain, fatigue, all of that, and I'm already at 2,800, and my husband says, hey, you want to go to Costco? My answer's got to be no, right? Because I don't have any left. So we've got to think about budgeting our energy like we budget our money, right? If you've only got $200 left and your husband wants to go do something expensive, which walking around Costco is expensive from an energy standpoint, right? Then that really helps you make better decisions in a more objective way. Because I think a lot of us with fibromyalgia, what we end up doing is reacting to our illness instead of planning ahead, right? So we don't know we've done too much until we feel terrible, right?
And that's what happens a lot with, many different types of illnesses or whatever. Because even me, I don't have fibromyalgia, but when I feel the fatigue come on my body, even if it's like a Thursday or Friday, I know that Saturday I need to probably lay in bed and rest because it could trigger something a whole lot more. In that, mine is triggered, I think it's repercussion from the stress or trauma. So is there any history of people in these situations that it could have been brought on because of trauma from their past? Or is it just it could happen to anybody at any time?
Yes and yes. So the way that I personally look at this, so this is, Tami theory here, but we do know that fibromyalgia has a genetic component. You are 8 times more likely to have fibromyalgia if you have a first-degree relative, right? So parents, children, siblings. So we know there's a genetic piece. And so the way I look at it is those genetics are in there. Right? It's like those shingles commercials, right? It's in there. And then something might happen to actually trigger it to sort of activate. And that's where I think the trauma piece comes in. We find that pretty much everyone with fibromyalgia does have some kind of trauma trigger. And that could be emotional trauma, right? Like an abusive relationship. It could be a physical trauma, like a car accident, giving birth, having COVID, anything like that. And in my case, it was actually years and years of chronic stress. So I didn't have any one particular, like this happened and then it was 9 years of working in an extremely stressful job. So yes, absolutely. And we know that the incidences of fibromyalgia are higher for people with a higher ACEs score, right? So the adverse childhood experiences score. People who have all of that in their childhood, they have a greater chance of developing fibromyalgia. So there absolutely is a trauma connection, but trauma looks kind of different for everybody, right? And trauma is sort of what your body thinks it is, not even necessarily what you think it is. Right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And some people can say, like you said, I had trauma in my job. And other people can be like, well, it's a job. Like nobody died. But really, truly, like it's interesting the way that stress hits different people and different kinds of stress. And so you can never really classify it as, well, yours wasn't as bad as mine was. I worked at a very toxic job in a high position for a decade. And that was more stressful than my divorce. And that's the honest truth. It's just different, the different dynamics. But yeah, it's interesting. And, that whole body keeps the score idea where you can have that trauma and it can be, and I hate to say stuck, but it's kind of what it is. You go through these traumatic experiences, and if you never really dealt with them or really walked through them like you should have, then they can just stay and keep wreaking havoc on your immune system and on your entire homeostasis of your body.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
What kind of advice have you given your clients that have come from that, where they've had a psychological component or a trauma component?
Yes. And another thing I want to add to what you just said there is that there can be things that are traumatic to your body that aren't necessarily traumatic mentally or emotionally. And I mean, my sister passed away almost 10 years ago, and just the way it all happened, the time I was able to spend with her, like when I think about that, when I feel that, like it doesn't feel traumatic. But I know to block out time on my calendar every year around the week that she died, because I know physically I'm going to be a little bit more tired. My brain's not going to work quite as much, right? So like it shows up. I think our cells know, even if our like cognitive, my brain, we're good, but my cells still know, So I think what I just described there is one of the things that you can do is just recognizing that, honoring that this is what it is, right? We're not going to try to live in denial, and make space for it. Right? So block those times off on your calendar when you know you're not going to be maybe at your best, when maybe you're going to need a little extra rest, more cuddles with the cat, whatever it might be. And then also, like, we need to work on those things too. So if there is that mental, emotional, spiritual component to all of that, we do need to process it and work through that. And I've had several of my clients say that looking at their fibromyalgia through the lens of their trauma, and vice versa, looking at their trauma through the lens of their fibromyalgia, was such a step forward for them, because they looked at them as two separate things. There was this trauma that happened over here, and then there was this illness over here with what's happening to me. But they're really like intertwined. They're all part of the same thing. So we need to think about, okay, what happens when I'm with my family, and every time I visit my family, I end up in a fibro flare after. It might not just be because you did too much. It might be those family dynamics. It might be all those other things that are coming up for you. And so we do need to work on them together.
Makes sense with the family, or the body being, mind, body, spirit. It's all together. It all affects each other. So that completely makes sense. So how long did it take you before you were able to heal your body and go into remission?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed in 2007. Like I said earlier, the first 2 years, just treading water. I started working with my coach in 2009, and that summer is when I became a coach myself and felt well enough really to do that. So that was mid-2009, and the last time I had any fibro pain was New Year's Eve 2018. So it wasn't like... Yes, thank you. I see your faces. I can see.
I was like, whoa, yeah, that's awesome.
Yes. But also, like, that wasn't just a few weeks or a few months or even just a few years. Like, that was, and I think people hearing that, number one, I want to set the realistic expectation. Like, this takes time, right? This isn't just like, yes, time for your body physically to heal, mentally, for us to change our habits. Like, there is a lot that has to change there. But also, it wasn't 9 years and then boom, I was fixed. Right? It was like a continual improvement. And so my goal with my clients is not that we want to immediately never, ever, ever have a fibro flare again. Our goal is to make those flares less, right? So if you would normally end up maybe at a 9 or a 10, now we're only ending up at maybe a 7. So that's improvement. We're also working to make those shorter. So if you would end up in a flare for a couple of weeks, maybe we can change that to a couple of days, and then longer in between. So if you would end up in a flare once a month, maybe it's every few months now. So we're looking for it to be not as severe, to be less frequent, to be shorter, right? And eventually we get to the point where they're just tiny little blips. One of the funniest things that happened earlier this year, I had a client who was graduating as a coach, and she was telling me, oh gosh, I hate that we're doing graduation right now because I'm in a flare up right now. And I wish I could tell people what it was like when I'm not in a flare. And so she did her fibromyalgia impact questionnaire, which is what we use to measure impact of fibromyalgia on your life. And her score was like 25. Now, average for, like, this is a scale of 0 to 100, and average is something like 56. When I've talked to my doctor friends about, like, is there a number where you're like, yeah, maybe you don't really even have fibromyalgia? One of the numbers that's been thrown around is 25, right? So she's feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm in a flare, and it's a 25. Right? It's like I'm in a flare and my pain level is a 1 instead of 0. I'll take it. Right? Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful. Yeah. Lizzie, do you have anything to add?
No, I think this is really great. I had an acquaintance when she found out she had fibromyalgia, and her journey was really just lonely, I think, just like really kind of like a toxic relationship. Man, that's the only thing I can relate to. Sorry, people. And so I'm thinking,
she's like, fibromyalgia is my toxic relationship partner. Dang it.
And I want a divorce.
That's right.
All kidding aside, I think we do end up in toxic relationships with our bodies. And it's not our bodies we need to divorce, it's ourselves, right? So when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia and finally got to the point where I was turned the corner and was starting to feel better, one of the things that helped me turn that corner was realizing that I had been treating my body like it was a misbehaving donkey or misbehaving printer or something, right? Like, no, you are going to do what I want you to do, right? And so I'm going to force you to do these things, and I'm going to, force you to get this done, even if it means not enough sleep or not drink enough water, or I'm going to eat these things anyway, even though I know it's going to make me sick. And all of a sudden I realize, sleep deprivation, that's what they do when they're torturing people. I'm eating these things that I know are going to make me sick. That's kind of like eating poison, right? And how I talk to myself in my own head, right? I would never talk to somebody else like that. And if I heard somebody else talking like that, I'd be like, I think you need to come to my house now. Like, you're done living there. But it's all right here. Right?
And I think I could really see, going back to my friend, how in that lonely journey, having a coach that specialized in this particular disease would have been so beneficial from out of the gate. Because you are learning the whole new unknown, so to speak. And I know it can be really extremely debilitating.
Yes, it absolutely can be. And very, like you said, very lonely, because you don't really know unless you know. Or some people say you don't get it until you get it, right? And we look completely normal. So I was diagnosed about 6 months after I got married. And those first 6 months were a whole thing. Because my husband and I had only lived in the same town for about a month before we got married. I met him He was on the East Coast, I was on the West Coast. Like, we saw each other for weekends, but I could sort of pull it together for that. And then we get married and he's kind of like, whoa, this is not what I thought I signed up for. One day I'm totally fine. And the next day I'm like, could you give me a glass of water? Like, I can't even take care of myself. And it's so, like, I just feel for him in that moment. Of course, I was feeling for me. But now looking back, I'm like, that had to be so confusing for him. So, like, what do I do with this? And not knowing what to do with that then meant that he couldn't care for me the way I needed to be cared for. I didn't know how to express that either. So it just was something that created a whole lot of separation there and can make you feel so very isolated. And that, I think, is the beauty of, not just working with somebody who has all that experience, but somebody who's walked that road too, right? We all have fibromyalgia. We've all gone through that. We've all had to figure out how to fire our doctors and get new ones, right? So it really can make such a big difference, even if it doesn't change your pain level, which I believe it's going to. But even if it doesn't, like, it changes your whole experience of the situation, right?
Well, yeah. And, like you were alluding to, this is not just I'm going to attack my fibromyalgia journey. This is a whole body experience. So you're literally bringing your entire body and mind and heart into health and wholeness. And that's really the answer for any of these types of chronic illnesses, really all of them, all the autoimmune, all of them. There's something going on in your body that is not right. And it could be things that you're eating, your body's reacting to, or it could be your body's reacting because it is in a disease type of a state. And it shouldn't be reacting just because you ate peanuts, So, but then when you throw in the component, the psychological component and the emotional component and the things that people have gone through that have flared this up, and you throw that in on top of it, by the time you're at the end of this, I imagine you can, testify to this, you really have become entirely a new person with new habits and new mindsets and new understanding, and taking better care of your body in every single way. So it's really a wonderful journey if you think about it. And I think everybody should do something like this. And I know we have a midlife channel also that this will feature on. And we're really big about that midlife wellness, because even if you don't have something that happened to you when you were young, like a fibromyalgia when you're young, usually middle age, by that time, you start experiencing some sort of health-related ailment. And it could be brought on by your hormones, your menopause. It could be brought on just because we've been eating the same way since we were young. And now our bodies are just reacting and inflamed because those bad oils. We're eating the sweets and now we're having insulin resistance. And maybe we're not moving our bodies as much either. So it really is just like this big, huge circle of, this is how you take care of yourself. And your coaching is wonderful to bring people there. Thank you. If somebody is listening and they need to know how to get a hold of you or your resources that you offer, like your book, tell us where to go. I'll have links too in the description for both YouTube and the podcast. But just let us know, where can we find you and what can we do to get a hold of your material?
Absolutely. So I do have my own podcast too. So if you like listening to podcasts, just look for Fibromyalgia Podcast. That's the name of it. Super simple. And you'll find me there. You can also just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com. And when you go to the website, there is resources in the link there, the menu. And in there, you can grab free downloads of my books. I've got my Fibromyalgia Wellness Style Quiz that sort of gives you that intersection of personality and health to give you some insights there. There's just a whole bunch of things out there that are great resources. And of course, you can reach out to me through the website as well. But the Fibromyalgia Podcast is probably the best way. And if you're somebody with fibromyalgia, you really do need to educate yourself. And so the more you can read, listen to, watch, the more you learn, the better place you'll be in for, making the best decisions for your health.
All right. Love it. Thank you so much, Tami. This has just been really enlightening, and I know it's going to be extremely helpful to our listeners. And if you out there are suffering with something like this, please look her up. Please go to the person who's lived it, who's been there, who's actually created an entire school for this, and get educated, get everything you need so that you can just follow in the footsteps of people who've gone into remission. So thank you, Tami, so much for your time.
Thank you, Tami. If this conversation spoke to you, if you've ever felt dismissed by a doctor, a partner, or even your own body, we want you to know you are not alone and you are definitely not crazy. If you're listening on the podcast, it would mean so much if you left a 5-star review. Those reviews help these stories reach other women who are still stuck in toxic relationships with people, with systems, or even with their own bodies. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who needs validation and hope today. Thank you for being a part of this community of survivors and thrivers. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Until next time, remember, you are worthy of safety, healing, and a life that feels like peace. Have a great day.